The air in the ancient, sprawling forest was not merely crisp. It was a living, breathing entity, composed of countless whispered secrets carried on the wind, the ghost of primeval fears, and the subtle, intoxicating, yet oddly comforting scent of damp earth and pine needles. It hung thick and unmoving, a stagnant shroud saturated with the faint tang of decaying leaves and the rich, wild essence of soil that had witnessed centuries of primal hunts, fleeting lives, and untold transformations. Each gust of wind that rustled through the dense canopy of ancient oaks and towering firs seemed to carry a low, guttural growl, a lament from the untamed wilderness that resonated deeply within the very roots of the forest, settling into the moss-covered stones and vibrating through the vast, echoing glades with a chilling hum. The silence, normally a balm to pagans' restless, nature-attuned soul, now seemed to press in on her with a physical weight, amplifying the frantic, almost supernatural beat of her own heart, a drum against her ribs. Pagan, a woman whose entire precarious existence revolved around the primal rhythms of the earth, the often unsettling whispers of the wild that most chose to ignore, found a profound, almost desperate solace within this ancient, time-worn embrace, a paradoxical comfort in the company of primeval forces that predated human understanding and civilization itself. Her life, a meticulously structured tapestry woven from the delicate threads of solitary pursuit, the minute observation of overlooked tracks, and the intuitive understanding of animal behaviors, had recently taken a sharp, unsettling turn, veering dangerously, inexorably, into the chilling realm of the truly monstrous, a descent into madness or horrifying revelation that threatened to shatter her very perception of reality, leaving her adrift in a sea of impossible truths. Her current obsession, a particularly vexing and increasingly disturbing personal quest, centered on a series of obscure local legends, fragmented tales of ancient bloodlines, moon-cursed transformations, and hidden rituals deemed too savage, too unbelievable, too unnatural for modern society to comprehend or tolerate, safely filed away as mere superstition. These were not the quaint folktales recounted by villagers around crackling hearth fires, designed to amuse or warn simple folk against venturing too deep into the woods, nor the romanticized legends whispered by thrill-seeking tourists looking for a cheap fright, a fleeting shiver. No, Pagan, with her innate preference for the shadowed corners of existence, for the veiled truths that lay just beyond conventional understanding, for the guttural cries that others ignored or simply dismissed as the wind, as the calls of mundane animals, consistently gravitated towards the footnotes, the tantalizing apocrypha, the hastily scribbled warnings in old, leather-bound journals, and the forbidden lore that lay locked away in the most forgotten, dust-shrouded sections of her family's ancestral library, sections rarely, if ever, disturbed by the harsh, revealing light of modern inquiry or the casual, uncomprehending curiosity of those untainted by the wild, by the raw, untamed power of the forest. She felt a kinship with these untamed secrets, a deep-seated intuition that they held a key to something profound and terrifying, a truth that pulsed with an unsettling, familiar rhythm in her own veins, a truth her family had guarded, or perhaps hidden from themselves, for centuries, a terrifying legacy woven into her very being. These legends, a disparate collection ranging from cryptic warnings scrawled and faded, almost a legible script about the moon's fury, detailing nights of unbridled savagery and inexplicable disappearances under the full celestial orb, leaving behind only chaos and whispers of dread, and fervently whispered accounts of man-beasts of the grove, condemned by ancient, superstitious towns for their brutal acts of dismemberment and massacres, to fragmented tribal histories promising forbidden power to those who embraced their inner beast and bizarre ancestral rituals detailing inexplicable human disappearances and the gruesome discovery of half-eaten carcasses, their bones meticulously stripped clean, hinted with a chilling, unnerving consistency at a clandestine lineage. It was a bloodline whispered to have existed in the deepest, most primordial shadows of human prehistory, an entity so ancient it seemingly predated even the earliest known human settlements, the first attempts at organized civilization, and perhaps even the very concept of settled human society itself, suggesting a more fundamental, brutal order that operated beyond the confines of man-made laws. Their true origins were lost to the impenetrable mists of time, even to the legends themselves, hinting at an existence beyond human comprehension, rooted in the very earth, in the raw, untamed heart of the wilderness, as old as the mountains themselves. They called themselves, in hushed and terrified tones that echoed from ancient lore across centuries, a primal growl from the deep forest that carried the weight of ages, the children of Lekin. To any conventional folklorist, to any rational mind steeped in the rigorous demands of empirical evidence and the comforting logic of established facts, these children were nothing more than mere folklore, a bizarre cult of feral fascination perhaps, born from the raw fear and simple superstition of unenlightened ages, or the fevered delusions of solitary, isolated forest dwellers driven mad by prolonged solitude and the crushing weight of their own untamed wilderness. But Pagan, armed with her preternatural eye for the overlooked detail, her uncanny ability to discern insidious patterns in the chaotic, often contradictory, tapestry of oral tradition and forgotten manuscripts, sensed something profoundly, terrifyingly more. She felt a deep, cold certainty blossoming in her gut, a burgeoning horror that chilled her far more than any academic discovery, any revelation of forgotten human savagery. This was something inhuman, something other, something that defied all logic and all natural law, a force of raw, untamed nature, a primordial evil lurking just beneath the surface of the world, a truth embedded in the very landscape, waiting to be rediscovered. It was a recurring symbol that first snagged her attention, then haunted her restless nights, and ultimately consumed her waking days, poisoning her very soul, infiltrating her thoughts with a creeping dread that no amount of sleep could alleviate. A stylized crescent moon, its edges sharp as predatory claws, often depicted with faint, almost imperceptible droplets falling from its lower curve, like a silent, celestial weeping, or perhaps, like drops of blood, freshly spilled from a victim. It was not merely a design. It was an emblem of an insatiable, unending transformation, a primal urge that could not be denied, a hunger that devoured sanity, leaving only instinct in its wake. It appeared with an unsettling frequency and in an unnerving variety of contexts, a ubiquitous, malevolent signature etched invisibly into the very fabric of the wilderness, a constant, silent presence that watched from the shadows, hidden in plain sight. It was etched subtly into the margins of forgotten family grimoires, almost imperceptible to the casual glance, a hidden signature waiting patiently to be found by the truly observant, by the truly cursed, by those whose blood called to it with an ancient, irresistible pull. It was intricately carved into the ornate, sometimes grotesque, totems used in ancient, blood-drenched rituals, their imagery disturbing not just for their explicit depiction of bestial forms, but for their chillingly precise hidden meaning, revealing secrets no sane mortal should ever know, truths that whispered of a brutal heritage, a lineage of predators. She even discovered it, to her growing horror and mounting, suffocating paranoia, subtly woven into the cracked, dry bindings of her own ancestral tapestries, their threads reeking of forgotten lineage, suppressed truths, and the silent screams of those who had dared to speak the unspeakable truth, now echoing only in the dusty confines of her family history. It pulsed with an unsettling consistency, a hidden thread, silver and cold, weaving through the entire, fragmented, and often contradictory history of her own bloodline, a dark, pulsing current beneath the surface of accepted reality, a lineage stained with untold violence and unspeakable acts, a legacy of savagery. Pagan felt it drawing her in, an inexorable gravitational pull, a silent, predatory howl from an abyss she instinctively knew she should never approach, yet with a growing sense of morbid fascination, found she could not resist. The deeper she delved, the more threads she uncovered, the tighter the web of terror seemed to draw around her, suffocating her rationality, replacing it, piece by terrifying piece, with an all-encompassing dread that permeated her very being, chilling her to the bone, making her question her own humanity. She began to see the world not as it presented itself, a rational, ordered place governed by natural laws, but as a vast, intricate illusion, a meticulously constructed stage for a hidden, monstrous drama orchestrated by unseen, primordial forces, a cosmic play with humanity as its unwitting, pathetic prey, blindly moving towards its inevitable fate, a fate they couldn't even perceive. Her once orderly notes, neatly categorized and cross-referenced, transformed into frantic scribbles, desperate, illegible attempts to capture the horrifying, unfathomable reality that was slowly but surely consuming her, staining her mind crimson with its terrible truth, a truth that gnawed at her very soul, relentlessly, ceaselessly, leaving her no peace. One particularly cold, oppressive night in late autumn, the kind where the biting wind seemed to carry the very essence of desolation, a mournful whisper of death, and the chilling promise of a long, unforgiving winter, Pagan was deep within the labyrinthine passages of her family's ancestral estate, a place that held more secrets than she could possibly imagine, its very walls breathing forgotten horrors into the cold, stale air. The grand, sprawling house groaned around her, a living, breathing entity of old with settling, ancient stone shifting beneath the immense weight of forgotten memories and forbidden knowledge, and forgotten spirits sighing through its desolate corridors. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through broken panes, every groan of settling timber was a mournful reminder of the centuries of secrets it had absorbed and now guarded within its formidable, unyielding walls, secrets of a dark heritage, a legacy of blood, of a cursed lineage. Pagan, a figure of gaunt dedication, her shoulders hunched against the spectral chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls, seeping into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably, perched precariously on a rickety, protesting wooden ladder amidst towering shelves filled with dust-laden volumes that seemed to disappear into the perpetual gloom of the hidden library, her breath pluming faintly in the frigid air, her hands aching and numb from the pervasive cold. Finally, triumphantly, unearthed it. It was a small, unassuming volume, its leather binding cracked and brittle with extreme age, its surface worn smooth in places by unknown hands, unknown centuries of furtive handling, as if countless desperate hands had sought its forbidden knowledge. Its cover was utterly devoid of any title, any inscription, any identifying mark whatsoever, a silent, chilling declaration of its forbidden nature, a warning cloaked in deceptive plainness, almost screaming its dangerous contents through its very anonymity. Its pages, brittle as autumn leaves caught in a perpetual silent drought, seemed to crumble slightly at her most delicate touch, threatening to disintegrate entirely into dust, scattering its horrifying truths to the unforgiving air, forever lost to human memory, erased by time, becoming one with the earth. It wasn't bound with conventional thread, as most ancient texts were, but rather with what felt disturbingly like thick, coarse animal sinew, a gruesome, organic sensation beneath her fingertips that made her skin crawl with primal revulsion, a feeling akin to touching something freshly deceased, something unholy, something that had once pulsed with stolen life, an animalistic, savage life force. The ink within, a deep, almost black red, seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the low, almost inadequate lamplight cast by her antique desk lamp, absorbing and reflecting the meager illumination as if it possessed a malign, sentient life of its own. An inner glow of malevolence, a silent, predatory gleam that seemed to gaze back at her from the page, pulling her deeper into its forbidden lore, into its ancient, blood-stained world, a world that was suddenly becoming terrifyingly real. This was it. She knew it immediately, with an absolute certainty that transcended mere academic intuition and bordered on a chilling premonition, a foreboding whisper from the universe itself, a direct, undeniable communication from the abyss, echoing in her very soul, promising untold horror. The crescent moon symbol, her cursed obsession, the undeniable mark of their untamed bloodline, was subtly etched into its spine, almost hidden, so minute and expertly rendered it could easily be mistaken for a natural flaw in the aged leather, a simple imperfection, easily dismissed by the unobservant, by the blind. It was like a secret handshake, passed down through uncounted centuries, meant only for those with the eyes to see and the nascent madness to understand. A key to a locked chamber of horrors that had always been there, just out of sight, waiting for someone to turn the lock, waiting for her, for a descendant with the courage or foolishness to seek it, to unleash it. The text within was not the familiar Latin or Greek, nor even ancient Hebrew or Aramaic, languages Pagan had painstakingly mastered over decades of rigorous scholarly pursuits, their intricate grammars and vast vocabularies now feeling utterly trivial in the face of this new, terrifying knowledge. Instead, it was an archaic dialect of Germanic, infused with primal, guttural sounds, so obscure, so profoundly ancient, that Pagan had only ever encountered it in fragmented, almost mythical linguistic dictionaries she had once dismissed as mere academic curiosities. Obscure footnotes to a language long dead to the world, a language of forgotten beasts and primordial urges. Yet here it was, living and breathing a new terror, a testament to an enduring, unseen evil that mocked the passage of time, a horrifying legacy passed down through blood, now claiming her. Her heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive, ancient silence of the library, a frantic, almost painful counterpoint to the thrumming of her own blood, suddenly too loud in her ears, a roaring torrent in her veins, a morbid symphony of her own terror, a premonition of her own inevitable, horrifying transformation, a fate she could feel stirring within her. This was no ordinary find. This was something dangerous, something profoundly unholy, a piece of primordial darkness brought to light, a truth so terrible it threatened to unravel the very fabric of her being, to tear her reality apart thread by agonizing thread, leaving her shattered, irrevocably altered. It felt, disturbingly, like holding a fragment of the wild night itself, a physical piece of the forest's untamed heart, radiating an unnatural, soul-chilling cold that seemed to seep directly into her bones, freezing her from the inside out, making her skin prickle with an intense, undeniable foreboding, a premonition of the wildness stirring within her, yearning for release. She spent weeks in a feverish, almost hallucinatory state, translating, hunched over the ancient script for endless, agonizing hours, the passage of time becoming meaningless, day blurring into night, then into another day, then another, a relentless, consuming cycle that ate away at her vitality, her very humanity. Food and sleep became distant, irrelevant concepts subsumed entirely by the consuming need to know more, to decipher every single chilling word, to unlock the full horror of her family's hidden history, its dark secrets. The dark, archaic words seemed to bleed into her subconscious, seeping into her very soul, invading her dreams and transforming them into vivid, blood-soaked nightmares from which she awoke screaming, soaked in cold sweat. The horrific images burned into her mind's eye, impossible to forget, a constant, tormenting loop of bestial savagery and lunar madness, visions of tearing flesh and golden eyes. Her mind, once a fortress of logical thought and academic rigor, meticulously organized and defended, became a whirlwind of arcane words, chilling revelations, and increasingly vivid, terrifying images that plagued her waking thoughts, twisting her perception of reality into a grotesque parody of its former self, blurring the lines between sanity and primal madness, between human and beast. Her sanity, always a fragile construct at the best of times, meticulously built upon logic, reason, and empirical data, began to fray irrevocably at the edges, unraveling thread by painstaking thread, like an old tapestry picked apart by unseen, malicious claws, revealing the abyssal darkness beneath. The book, which she tentatively and morbidly named The Lunar Howl, spoke in excruciatingly chilling detail of an eternal, insatiable hunger for flesh, a primal urge that transcended mere physical need, a spiritual and existential craving for the very essence of life itself, for the wild vitality of others, a hunger that could never truly be sated. It described, with a chilling raw elegance that belied its horrific content, beings who dwelled perpetually in the deepest forests, hidden from the scorching, purifying light of the sun, and the judging gaze of man, drawing their very sustenance, their unholy existence, their unending, ageless life, from the torn flesh and raw power of mortals, feasting upon the unwitting. It described their chilling, almost supernatural strength, a raw, brutal power that could shatter bone with a flick of a wrist, rend steel like tissue paper, and tear through stone with a primal roar, reshaping the very landscape with their savage might, leaving trails of devastation. It detailed their terrifying ability to move unseen among the living, like shadows given form, their presence a cold void in the hearts of those they passed, a whisper of dread that stole the warmth and color from a room, leaving only a chilling emptiness in their wake, a sense of something vital having been brutally excised, a soul devoured. The Codex spoke, too, of their elaborate, blood-soaked rituals, ancient rites performed under the full, silver light of the moon, when the veil between worlds thinned and their power was at its zenith, whispered in guttural tongues long dead to human ears, summoning unspeakable power from unseen realms, binding forces of nature to their feral will. It detailed their ancient, immutable laws, a code of conduct as rigid and unforgiving as bedrock, passed down through forgotten eons, enforced with ruthless, savage efficiency, punishing transgressions with a swift, merciless finality. It outlined their terrifyingly rigid hierarchy, a pack structure that had remained undisturbed, unchallenged, for millennia, a dark, grotesque parody of human societal order, far more stable, far more insidious, and infinitely more cruel, ruled by primal instinct and brute force. They were not supernatural monsters in the traditional sense, the Codex chillingly revealed, not the shambling zombies of B-grade horror films, nor the fire-breathing dragons of heroic myths, nor the shambling ghouls of graveyard tales. Rather, they were a parallel evolution, a predatory species that had, through countless millennia, learned to mimic humanity with chilling precision, to wear its skin with a chilling, perfect deception, to integrate seamlessly into its societies, weaving themselves into the very fabric of human existence, becoming utterly indistinguishable from the unsuspecting prey they so effortlessly hunted, becoming the wolves among sheep. They were, the text asserted with an unnerving confidence that resonated with pagans' deepest, most primal fears, the true rulers of the night, their dominion extending far beyond the shadows, reaching into the brightest, most public corners of the human world, infiltrating every institution, every aspect of life, pulling the strings of power with clawed hands, unseen, undetected. They manipulated events from behind an impenetrable veil of meticulous secrecy, pulling the strings of empires, directing the flow of wealth, shaping the destinies of nations and civilizations with cold, calculating precision. Their hands stained with the blood of generations, their influence unseen, their power absolute and unquestioned, a silent, pervasive tyranny that had always existed. The more she read, the more the gnawing fear in her gut transformed into a chilling, absolute certainty. Her own family, her very bloodline, was intricately linked to this ancient, terrible lineage. The crescent moon symbol, appearing subtly on family crests and old jewelry, on the very locket she wore around her neck, suddenly pulsed with a horrifying, undeniable truth, binding her to them irrevocably, sealing her fate, for she was one of them, a child of the moon. The more pagan read, the more threads of horrifying evidence she meticulously collected, the more profound and disturbing connections she made, weaving a terrifying tapestry of their pervasive, inescapable influence, a web from which she could not escape, a fate she could not outrun, for it was her destiny. Unexplained disappearances that dotted local history reports, vanishing without a trace, often dismissed by bewildered authorities as simple runaways or accidental deaths, now seemed to conform to a horrifying, deliberate pattern of abduction and consumption, of silent, brutal hunts under the indifferent gaze of the moon, leaving nothing but terror. Sudden, baffling outbreaks of inexplicable animal mutilations and savage attacks that swept through remote villages and forgotten towns, baffling local hunters and leaving behind a trail of torn flesh and primal fear, now screamed of unseen predators, of creatures tearing and devouring, leaving only chaos and a lingering scent of ozone and blood in their wake. The rapid and inexplicable rise and fall of certain powerful aristocratic families, their fortunes amassed and lost with dizzying speed, their lineage often ending abruptly and without heirs, suddenly made chilling, dreadful sense, revealing a pattern of calculated decimation, of ancient scores settled in blood, a silent, hidden war waged across centuries. It all began to fit into a coherent, albeit horrifying, pattern, a grotesque, blood-soaked mosaic that pulsed with malevolent intent, a design of control and consumption spanning centuries, culminating in the present, a horrifying, living history that was now Pagan's present, her inescapable reality. A cold dread, a fear far deeper and more primal than mere academic curiosity, began to seep into her very bones, chilling her to the marrow, making her teeth chatter uncontrollably even in a warm room, a constant, involuntary tremor in her hands that made writing almost impossible, her pen scratching frantically across the page, seeking to outrun the truth that relentlessly pursued her. She started seeing the crescent moon symbol everywhere now, not just confined to the dusty pages of ancient texts or obscure engravings in forgotten forest shrines, but insidious and pervasive in the modern world. A subliminal message of their omnipresence, a dark brand on everything she laid her eyes upon. She saw it in the subtle architecture of modern buildings, in the ornate ironwork of city bridges, woven into the intricate, abstract patterns of corporate logos, even in the delicate, intricate designs of high-end jewelry worn by the city's elite, glittering under bright lights, mocking her newfound awareness with their silent, ubiquitous presence, their undeniable claim over all. They were embedded, insidious, in the very fabric of society, operating in plain sight, hidden by the very normalcy they mimicked, by the very unwillingness of humanity to perceive the true horror that coexisted with them, like parasites in a living host, slowly, silently consuming everything from within, unnoticed and unchallenged, thriving on ignorance. Her world, once so firmly anchored in the tangible, in the empirical, in the comforting rationality of her isolated life, began to dissolve into a shifting, paranoid landscape, a terrifying kaleidoscope of hidden horrors, each new sight, each passing shadow, a fresh assault on her fragile sanity, eroding her grip on reality, pulling her deeper into the abyss of truth, into the heart of the wild. She felt watched, hunted, a profound, inescapable sense of being observed by unseen, predatory eyes, as if the very act of deciphering their forbidden secrets, of daring to gaze into their abyss, had marked her irrevocably for their attention, for their primal wrath, for their inescapable judgment, a claim on her very being, body and soul, a terrifying inheritance. The ancestral library, once her sanctuary, her haven of peace and contemplative thought, transformed into a cage of ancient whispers, each creak of the floorboards, each shadow thrown by the swaying lamplight, a potential harbinger of their terrifying, inevitable arrival. She began sleeping with a hunting knife clutched in her hand, the lunar howl clutched to her chest like a cursed talisman, its eerie weight a constant, suffocating reminder of the horrific truth she had unearthed. The dark red ink seemed to pulse with a faint, infernal glow even in the darkest hours, a spectral heartbeat against her own frantic pulse, driving her further and further into her all-consuming obsession, her waking nightmare, a nightmare that was bleeding into reality, blurring the lines between dream and terror, between human and beast irrevocably. In a desperate, almost pathetic attempt to cling to some semblance of normalcy, to validate her increasingly fragile grip on reality, to convince herself that she wasn't simply descending into the swirling abyss of madness, she confided in her distant, estranged cousin, Lorcan. Lorcan was a man of staunch, practical skepticism, a true survivalist grounded firmly in the bedrock of tangible threats and the harsh logic of the wilderness. He listened to Pagan's increasingly frantic pronouncements, her wild theories, her whispered horrors, with a polite, albeit thinly veiled, condescending smirk. His eyes, though attempting to convey concern, held a hint of weary amusement, as if listening to a particularly elaborate fictional tale spun by an overactive imagination, a harmless eccentricity from his odd cousin. "Pagan, my dear cousin," Lorcan rumbled, his voice deep as a bear's growl, polishing a well-used hunting rifle by the fire in his remote cabin, the flickering light glinting on the steel barrel, a symbol of human defense against the unknown. "You're letting these old tales get to you. Ancient clans, certainly. Wild animal attacks, absolutely. Human depravity and cruelty throughout history, without a doubt. But men turning into wolves? Lycans, as you so dramatically put it? That's the stuff of old wives' tales, of cheap dime novels, of silly campfire stories designed to frighten gullible children. It is not, I assure you, serious talk, not in this day and age. It is certainly not the kind of thing that merits your obvious distress, your alarming deterioration. You look as though you haven't slept in a month. You're seeing things that aren't there, old friend. You need to pull back from this research. Get some fresh air. Clear your head. Go for a long hike away from these woods." He tried, with a patronizing patience that only fueled Pagan's internal fire, making her frustration burn hotter, to wave away Pagan's growing obsession with logical, mundane explanations. He attributed Pagan's increasingly gaunt appearance, the profound dark circles under her eyes, her unkempt hair, and her wild, almost feverish gaze to nothing more than chronic overwork, excessive caffeine consumption, and perhaps a touch of seasonal affective disorder brought on by the long, dark winter months of isolation. Lorcan's unwavering skepticism, though incredibly frustrating and dismissive, provided a fleeting, fragile anchor to the mundane, ordinary world. A tenuous connection to a reality Pagan was rapidly losing, a last thread to sanity that threatened to snap, leaving her adrift in the terrifying unknown. It was a brief, almost illusory respite from the encroaching, suffocating darkness that threatened to consume Pagan entirely. Yet, Pagan knew, with an absolute, terrifying certainty that resonated in every fiber of her being, a cold, hard truth lodged in her soul, that she was right. The proof was in her hands, in the words that whispered, screamed, of an unholy, impossible existence. A truth too horrifying, too vast, for the comfortable, ignorant world to bear. It was a truth that would shatter everything Lorcan believed in, everything that humanity held dear, everything that made their world feel safe, obliterating their carefully constructed illusions, leaving only raw, primal fear. It was a truth that mirrored her own chilling dreams, growing more vivid, more visceral, more real with each passing night, beckoning her into the wild, into the primal transformation that awaited her. Driven by an even more desperate, gnawing need for concrete corroboration, a need that consumed her from the inside out like a parasitic worm, a relentless, burning hunger for validation that transcended all logic and self-preservation, Pagan used the Codex's increasingly cryptic clues to pinpoint a specific, terrifying location. It was a remote, ancient clearing nestled deep within the foreboding, perpetually mist-shrouded folds of the forgotten Blackwood Forest, a region steeped in its own dark legends and chilling whispers of ancient, primordial evil, a place where the very air felt heavy with forgotten screams and the scent of wild, untamed fury, a palpable sense of menace that permeated the very ground. This particular place, long avoided and shrouded in generations of chilling local legends, tales of profound misfortune, inexplicable madness, and travelers who simply vanished without a trace, their very names erased from memory, was notoriously shunned by the superstitious locals, who would not even utter its name aloud, crossing themselves if it was merely hinted at, believing it to be cursed ground, a gateway to unspeakable horrors. It was marked by a colossal ancient standing stone, split down the middle as if by a bolt of lightning, its jagged edges pointing accusingly at the sky, that locals called the Moon Scar, a permanent wound in the earth. The journey itself was arduous, a grueling odyssey through increasingly desolate and hostile landscapes that seemed to actively resist her passage, the thorny undergrowth tearing at her clothes, the branches lashing at her face, almost as if the forest itself sought to repel her, to protect its dark secrets. The narrow, winding deer paths, overgrown and barely discernible, were littered with unsettling omens. Bleached animal bones picked clean by unseen creatures, fresh claw marks gouged into ancient trees, and an eerie, pervasive silence broken only by the mournful howl of the wind, carrying distant, spectral cries that Pagan could almost swear were human, or something disturbingly close to it, echoing through the desolate, darkening trees. The sky above was perpetually overcast, a bruised, leaden canvas from which no light seemed capable of breaking through, no hint of sun or stars, only an oppressive, unending gray that pressed down on the world, mirroring the gloom in her soul, reflecting the internal storm that raged within her, a gathering tempest. The air was heavy with an unnatural, penetrating chill, a pervasive cold that seemed to sink into her very bones, regardless of her layers of clothing, a cold that felt alive, watching, waiting, an intelligent cold, a predatory awareness that surrounded her, closing in. The few isolated trappers she encountered on the desolate outskirts of the nearest, almost deserted logging camp, a collection of ramshackle huts clinging precariously to the side of a mountain, their windows dark and unwelcoming, eyed her with a mixture of profound suspicion and a disturbing, almost pitying sorrow when she dared to mention her destination. They spoke in hushed, fearful tones, their voices barely audible above the howling wind, their eyes wide with ancestral terror of a blight on the land, of cattle found grotesquely torn apart and drained of blood, their carcasses shriveled and pale, their eyes wide with silent horror. They spoke of travelers who simply vanished without a trace, leaving only a lingering scent of fear and ozone in their wake, their fates forever unknown, their very existence erased from the records, a chilling pattern of disappearance, a harvest of flesh, unending and brutal. Their collective fear was palpable, a silent scream that echoed in the desolate, windswept landscape, a chilling premonition of the horrors that awaited her, a chorus of unspoken, desperate warnings that she, in her driven madness, could not heed, too deep in her pursuit of truth, too close to the precipice of understanding, too intertwined with the very thing she hunted, now hunting her. She arrived at the moon's scar clearing as dusk bled slowly, inexorably, into night, the last vestiges of the sun swallowed by the jagged horizon, leaving the world cloaked in a deepening indigo, a bruise-colored twilight that promised only darkness, deep and consuming, a night that felt eternal, filled with hidden things, unseen terrors, waiting to be unleashed. The moon, a mere sliver of bone, a ghostly fingernail clipping in a bruised, starless sky, offered no comfort, only a pale, unsettling luminescence that seemed to highlight the decay, the scattered bones, the lingering malevolence of the clearing, making its horrors more stark, more pronounced against the dim light, throwing grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The standing stone itself, split down the middle, loomed like a grotesque, ancient maw gaping at the sky, its silhouette jagged and menacing against the fading twilight, like a broken tooth in the gaping mouth of the forest, a monument to forgotten terrors, a symbol of primal power, drawing her in. Gnarled ancient trees, their branches leafless and twisted into grotesque, supplicating forms, seemed to claw at the perpetually dark sky like bony fingers, begging for release, or perhaps for blood, for a sacrifice, for a new offering. The undergrowth, thick and oppressive, groaned a welcoming sigh on unseen roots, a sound that Pagan felt deep in her gut, a premonition of doom, a final, irrevocable step into the abyss, a threshold crossed into the heart of the primal, the very essence of the wild. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from within the colossal split stone, a low, resonant vibration that resonated deep within Pagan's chest, a primordial thrum that spoke of ancient, dormant power, patiently awaiting its moment to awaken, to feed, to transform her, to consume her. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal instinct screaming at her to turn back, to flee, to run as far and as fast as her legs would carry her from this place of unholy transformation, this ancient den of terror, this blood-soaked altar, before it was too late, before the darkness swallowed her whole, before the moon rose, sealing her fate, transforming her into one of them. Yet, the scholar's insatiable hunger for truth, a morbid, self-destructive curiosity that transcended fear and reason, compelled her forward, one hesitant, trembling step after another, deeper into the gaping maw of the beast, into the very heart of her own growing nightmare, the nightmare she had, in her obsessive quest, sought out herself, pulling her further into the darkness, into the mournful howl that seemed to rise from the very earth, beckoning. The interior of the clearing was a vast, echoing tomb. Not a physical tomb, but a spiritual one, where hope went to die, where sanity fractured and bled away into the wildness. Dust mingled with ancient leaves and rotting wood, a shroud of years, of centuries, of utter, profound neglect, suffocating the primal remnants of a long-dead, presumably torn apart, primal ritual. The air was heavy, stale, and smelled of something ancient, something that had been sealed away from the light for far too long, a stench of forgotten time, of stale death and fresh, cloying blood, a truly sickening aroma. Thick, matted clumps of hair, both human and animal, clung to the thorny bushes like macabre decorations, swaying almost imperceptibly in the still air, each strand a testament to the passage of time and the absence of human life, to a stillness that was unnatural, terrifying, a silence that screamed of violence. Yet, beneath the grime, beneath the accumulated detritus of ages, Pagan noticed peculiar, unsettling details that prickled at her skin, sending deep, icy chills down her spine, a premonition of what was to come, a cold dread that tightened its grip. A faint, metallic scent, like old copper, like dried rust, yet somehow sharper, fresher, more visceral, lingered persistently in the stagnant air, mingling with the heavy scent of decay and something else, something cloying and sweet, like stagnant roses and fresh, warm blood, a truly nauseating, horrifying combination that made her stomach clench, threatening to betray her fragile control. Crude, horrifying images, scratched into the bark of the ancient trees, depicted scenes of grotesque, bestial transformations, figures with impossibly elongated shadows and eyes that seemed to glow with an infernal, internal light in the oppressive gloom, capturing the very essence of forbidden savagery and unholy metamorphosis, disturbing in their implications, as if they were drawn from her own nightmares, her subconscious fears. She found a hidden, almost entirely overgrown path, precisely as the Codex had hinted, its location described with chilling accuracy, a secret almost too well kept, disguised by nature itself, by centuries of relentless growth. It led downwards, steeply and relentlessly, a winding descent into the suffocating, crushing darkness of an underground cave system, a descent into pure, unadulterated cold that seemed to drain the warmth from her very soul, leaving her hollow and brittle, a shell of herself, her very essence leaching away, preparing for a terrible change. The air grew colder, heavier, charged with an unspoken, malevolent presence that pressed in on her from all sides, a tangible force of dread that threatened to crush her utterly, to drive her to her knees, to break her will. She descended, her headlamp beam trembling, a single, inadequate spear of light against an ocean of impenetrable shadow, illuminating ancient, unhallowed carvings on the cold, damp stone walls of the cavern. More crescent moon symbols, now larger, more intricately detailed, intertwined with crude, horrifying images of fanged, snarling beasts, their forms both grotesque and strangely alluring, a terrifying union of humanity and primal instinct, of the divine and the profane, a hybrid horror. The carvings thrummed with a sinister, palpable energy, as if the very stone remembered the unspeakable transformations it had witnessed, the countless rivers of blood that had consecrated it over the millennia, pulsing with malevolent life, a dark, beating heart in the earth's cold embrace, echoing with silent, ancient howls of triumph and hunger. She finally reached a vast, echoing subterranean chamber, a space clearly not meant for mortal eyes, a true catacomb of the transformed, a heart of darkness carved from the living rock, pulsating with a silent, ancient rhythm that resonated with the primal fear in her own chest, a terrifying synchronicity that bound her to this place. In the absolute center, a colossal altar, carved from impossibly dark, rough-hewn stone that seemed to absorb all light, dominating the room like a monolithic, profane shrine to some forgotten, terrifying god of the hunt and bloodlust, a deity of eternal hunger and primal savagery. Around it, other, smaller stone pedestals lay in silent, terrifying repose, arranged in a chilling symmetry, like satellites orbiting a dark, sleeping star, each a testament to a life consumed, a soul extinguished in savage fury, a brutal end. The air here was utterly, unnaturally still, cold as the grave itself, a cold that bit at his exposed skin, sinking into his bones, yet Pagan felt an oppressive, almost suffocating warmth emanating from the black altar, a sense of immense, dormant power, a sleeping horror on the cusp of awakening, stirring from a long, unholy slumber, preparing to rise, to hunt, to reclaim its territory, to claim her. She heard a faint sound, a rhythmic, almost imperceptible throb, like a distant, sluggish heartbeat echoing in the vast emptiness, a pulse of ancient evil, a beat that vibrated in her very bones, a resonance with her own rapidly beating heart, terrifyingly alive and vulnerable, thrumming with a shared, dark rhythm. It was then, as the last vestiges of her rational mind began to splinter and shatter, giving way entirely to primal, unreasoning terror, that the true, unholy horror revealed itself in full, unfettered glory, stepping from the very shadows themselves, becoming manifest, becoming terrifyingly real. From the deepest, most oppressive shadows that clung to the corners of the chamber like living entities, writhing and expanding, figures began to emerge. They were not the shambling, decaying corpses of horror films, not the grotesque, monstrous caricatures of human nightmares. not the bestial, mindless brutes of campfire tales designed to frighten children. No, these were beings of breathtaking, terrifying power. Their forms were impossibly muscular, their movements fluid and silent as shadows, yet radiating a raw, untamed strength that promised swift and brutal violence, an almost casual display of destructive capability. Their skin, where visible through tattered clothing, was rough, scarred, and often covered in coarse, dark hair, hinting at their feral nature, a barely contained wildness. Their faces, though still retaining a haunting trace of humanity, were contorted by elongated muzzles, razor-sharp teeth, and eyes that burned with a feral, unnatural golden glow, filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence that saw through all human pretense, all facades, seeing only the truth of flesh and blood. They were not mere animals, but intelligent, ancient predators, patient and cunning, biding their time. They moved with an unsettling, otherworldly grace, gliding rather than walking, their forms impossibly fluid, like smoke given form, like shadows poured through stone, an ethereal dance of primal death, a silent, deadly ballet choreographed by instinct. Their numbers grew, materializing from the deeper shadows, until Pagan was surrounded by a silent, watchful circle of predators. Their collective gaze a physical weight upon her, pressing her into the cold stone floor, suffocating her with their sheer, overwhelming presence, their silent judgment. Each face was a mask of primal, untamed fury, a facade of controlled savagery, yet the hunger beneath, the unholy ancient bloodlust, was undeniable, a palpable force that vibrated in the chilled air, making her teeth ache and her very blood hum, resonating with their own dark, unholy desires, pulling her closer to her inevitable fate, making her almost yearn for it. She felt her blood grow cold, her mind screaming in recognition, a primal, unadulterated terror that stripped her of all pretense, all intellectual curiosity, all courage, leaving her as nothing more than prey, a mere meal, a vessel to be torn apart, consumed and transformed, just like the legends foretold. This was it. The children of Leakin, the werewolves, they were real, and she, Pagan, was their guest, their victim, served up on a platter of her own making, her own morbid curiosity leading her to her doom, to her end, to her terrible inheritance. A figure impossibly tall and broad-shouldered, with an almost tangible aura of primal authority that seemed to warp the very air around him, distorting the light, making the shadows deepen in his wake, stepped forward from the silent, watchful circle. His dark, matted hair, streaked with silver like a winter storm, flowed like a wild mane over shoulders clad in rough, animal hides, a garment so dark it seemed to absorb the meager light, creating a void around him, an island of pure, untamed ferocity, a living shadow of the forest itself. His face, though contorted by bestial features, held a haunting trace of human intellect, his jawline sharp, his eyes a piercing, feral golden, captivating and utterly devoid of human warmth or empathy, filled only with an ancient, calculating intelligence that chilled her to the bone, colder than any ice. But his lips were drawn back in a perpetual snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one a promise of violence, a threat of exquisite pain. And when he spoke, a low, guttural growl that resonated deep in his chest. A horrifying transformation seemed to ripple through him, muscles coiling under his skin, his form shifting subtly, his frame expanding. Two elongated, needle-sharp fangs gleamed wickedly in the dim light, catching the spectral glow from the altar, reflecting it like tiny, deadly jewels, perfectly adapted for their purpose. "You have trespassed, mortal." His voice was a ragged whisper, a sound like tearing flesh, a seductive, deadly growl that promised oblivion, a final release from her terror, a peace that came with savage consumption, with annihilation. Into places you were not meant to see, into depths you were never meant to plumb. You have disturbed the slumber of ages, a sleep far older than your kind could ever comprehend, a sleep built on the silent sacrifice of countless generations, upon the very blood of your ancestors, of your entire lineage. Your blood carries the scent of our kind, the echo of the wild, the call of the moon. His eyes, pools of liquid gold, fixated on her, piercing her very soul, dissecting her with an ancient, cold, predatory intelligence that saw through all her human defenses, her intellect, her courage, her very will to live, leaving her exposed and vulnerable, laid bare before his terrible gaze, a helpless, struggling animal. She felt a strange, terrifying combination of paralyzing fear and morbid fascination, drawn inexorably to his terrible, inhuman power, like a moth to a deadly, enchanting flame, unable to look away from her own impending doom, her gaze locked by a primal force she couldn't comprehend, a bond forged in terror and blood, drawing her inexorably to her fate, to the transformation that now felt utterly inevitable. Pagan, despite the paralyzing fear that gripped her, a fear so profound it threatened to steal her breath and crush her very will, transforming her into a shivering, mindless lump of terrified flesh, a quivering animal before its predator, found her voice, albeit a ragged, almost inaudible whisper, a desperate gasp for defiance, a final plea that barely broke the silence. The Codex, it speaks of you, it reveals your truth. It warned me of your existence, of your methods, of your ancient lineage, of your true nature. I sought the truth and I found it. I found you. She instinctively gestured with a trembling hand towards the crevice where the book had disappeared. Though it was no longer in her grasp, its knowledge still burning in her mind, a torch in the darkness. The male figure, whom she instinctively knew was their alpha, the true leader of this subterranean den, the ancient patriarch of this horrific lineage, a being whose very existence predated recorded history and whose power seemed boundless, absolute, tilted his head, a gesture of chilling amusement, like a wolf toying with a trapped rabbit it had no intention of releasing, only prolonging its torment, enjoying its terror, savoring the fear. Ah, the lunar howl, he growled, his voice dripping with an almost cloying sweetness, like honey laced with venom, his golden eyes flickering towards the empty space where the book had been, knowing its location without needing to see it. A fragmented truth, indeed. A dangerous curiosity for mortal hands, particularly hands as inquisitive, as foolish, as utterly reckless, as yours, pagan. It was meant to be lost, child, forgotten, its words silenced forever beneath the crushing weight of time and human ignorance, buried deep where no light could ever reach them, where no mortal could ever disturb our secret, our dominion, our long, quiet reign over this world. His gaze drifted from pagan to the ancient book, now clutched securely by one of his pack, a massive, silent male with eyes like molten gold, and a flicker of something that resembled regret, or perhaps merely profound annoyance at her audacity, crossed his bestial features, like a fleeting cloud across a moonlit sky, momentarily disturbing its serene, deadly ferocity, a ripple on a placid, dark lake before the storm breaks in full. Suddenly, another werewolf, a female with eyes like chips of amber, sleek and powerful, moved with impossible, breathtaking speed, a blur of motion that pagan's human eyes could barely follow, a ripple in the fabric of reality, a blatant defiance of physics, an impossible feat of raw power. She snatched a discarded bone from the floor near pagan's feet and snapped it in two with terrifying ease, the sound echoing sharply in the chamber, a loud crack that resonated with pagan's own fragile bones, her touch fleetingly cold, like a phantom limb, leaving a prickling, painful sensation in the air, a visceral warning of what was to come. The alpha smiled, a slow, predatory unveiling of his true, terrifying nature, the fangs lengthening visibly, glistening faintly in the dim, oppressive light, sharp as razors, ready to pierce flesh and bone. You have learned too much, pagan, far, far too much. Knowledge, in your fleeting, fragile world, is often equated with power, with progress, with enlightenment. You cling to it like a drowning man to a spar, a foolish, desperate hope. In ours, however, in the eternal night that is our natural domain, in our timeless existence, it is merely a death sentence. A very slow, agonizing death sentence if we so choose. And we do choose to make it so, to make your last moments a symphony of despair and primal fear, a testament to our power, a lesson for any who follow. His words echoed, chillingly, in the vast, echoing chamber, reverberating in pagan's very soul. A sentence pronounced from eternity, from the heart of the wild, inescapable, irreversible. A chill far colder than the subterranean air. A chill that seemed to emanate from her very core, from the deepest recesses of her soul. A cold that promised death and oblivion. An eternal nothingness enveloped Pagan entirely. It was a cold that spoke of countless unlived lives, of the void, of the primal emptiness from which they sprang. A void that now threatened to consume her, to swallow her whole. She was no longer a curious scholar on a groundbreaking expedition, eager for discovery, for acclaim, for validation. She was no longer a seeker of hidden truths, daring to challenge the established narratives of humanity. She was prey. She saw the subtle, horrifying shift in their golden eyes, a deepening of the feral glow, a burning intensity that promised violence, the almost imperceptible tensing of their impossibly muscular bodies, a coil of lethal readiness, poised to strike, the raw, unholy hunger that now shone nakedly, unapologetically, in their collective gaze, a thirst that burned with the heat of 1,000 years, a famished, ancient fire for flesh and blood, for the very essence of life. She was a meal, a curious morsel to be savored, to be devoured at their leisure, her life force a fleeting, delicious warmth to them, a temporary satisfaction before they moved on to the next hunt, the next victim, leaving only echoes of terror. She knew with an absolute, undeniable certainty that pierced her to her very soul, that she would not leave this terrifying place alive, that her desperate journey ended here, in this cold, dark tomb, her final unmarked resting place, a footnote in their endless, savage history. The air in the chamber crackled with their silent anticipation, a low, buzzing hum of predatory excitement, a collective readiness for the kill, the unspoken promise of a swift, merciless end, a brutal tearing, a primal oblivion, a final, cold bite. The very stones seemed to hum with their hunger, a vibration of dark, ancient life, reverberating through the earth itself, mirroring the wild thrumming in her own veins, a terrifying, inescapable echo of the beast. Panic, raw and unadulterated, a tidal wave of pure, instinctual terror, surged through her, threatening to drown her consciousness, to reduce her to a screaming, mindless animal, whimpering in the face of its predators, utterly helpless. Her mind screamed for escape, for any semblance of hope, however futile, however impossible, a desperate, silent plea. She lunged, not towards an exit she couldn't see, not towards a hope of escape, for such thoughts were beyond her in her primal fear, but instinctively, desperately, blindly, at the closest werewolf, a desperate, futile attempt to create a distraction, a moment of chaos, anything to break the suffocating stillness of their predatory vigil, to buy herself a single, fleeting second of false hope, a final defiant act against the inevitable, a last burst of futile energy. Her pathetic attempt was met with effortless disdain, a casual flick of a massive paw, sending her sprawling. The female werewolf, the one with amber eyes, simply sidestepped, a blur of motion so fluid it was almost supernatural, a dance of death, an insult to her clumsy, human efforts, a brutal demonstration of their superior power. Pagan stumbled, her momentum carrying her forward into empty air. Her body suddenly useless, a puppet with severed strings, collapsing, her limbs unresponsive. She fell hard onto the cold, unforgiving stone floor, her head hitting the unforgiving surface with a sickening thud that echoed in the cavern. A sound of fragile mortality, a sound of bone against rock. A sharp crack, loud and sharp in the oppressive silence, echoed in the vast chamber, followed by a searing, blinding pain that shot through her left ankle. A white-hot agony that made her gasp. A strangled cry escaping her lips, lost in the echoing silence of the tomb. She cried out, a pathetic, strangled sound that seemed to be swallowed by the silent, judging presence of the werewolves. A sound of utter despair and defeat, absorbed by the hungry darkness, unheeded, unheard by the outside world. The Alpha, his imposing form radiating raw power, knelt beside her with an unsettling, almost inhuman grace, his movements silent as falling snow, as ephemeral as a shadow, a specter of impossible menace. His golden eyes gleamed with a detached, clinical curiosity, a hunter observing a particularly interesting prey, utterly devoid of any human warmth or empathy, only a cold, ancient hunger. His touch, when he reached out, was impossibly cold, like ice itself, as he ran a single elegant, clawed finger along her jawline, a delicate, chilling caress that sent shivers down her spine, leaving a literal trail of frozen dread on her skin, a burning cold that seeped into her very being, numbing her from the outside in, paralyzing her. "Such fragile things, mortals," he growled, his voice a low, guttural purr, a soothing, deadly lullaby that seemed to lull her very life force, drawing it closer to the surface, making it vulnerable, making her want to surrender to the sweet oblivion, to the embrace of death. So full of fear, so quick to break, so easily extinguished. Your lives are but fleeting sparks in the vast, eternal darkness that is our true home. You flicker and die, a momentary inconvenience, while we endure, eternal and unyielding, unchanging, always the apex predator. Yet your blood holds the very essence of life, the fleeting warmth, the vibrant, chaotic energy that we crave, that sustains our eternal existence, a sweetness found nowhere else in this barren world, a taste of fleeting mortality that is our greatest pleasure, our ultimate ecstasy, our reason for being. And your blood, pagan, tastes of our lineage, a familiar echo, a promise of what you are to become. She could feel his fangs lengthen, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift behind his snarling lips, a terrifying, explicit promise of what was to come, of the final draining, the last heartbeat of her mortal life, the last drop of warmth leaving her body, transforming her, binding her to their curse, to the wildness within her. The faint, metallic scent in the air intensified, now mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of something ancient and terrible, something truly primordial, a scent that hinted at countless lives extinguished in this very place, a history written in blood and bone, seeping from the very stones, permeating the air with primal menace, a tangible horror that pressed down on her, suffocating her. She could feel the rapid, frantic pulse in her throat, a drumbeat of her own impending demise, a frantic tattoo against his predatory stillness, a countdown to oblivion, each beat a step closer to death, a painful, inescapable march towards the end. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable, for the agonizing kiss of death, the piercing fangs that would drain her dry, leaving her an empty husk, a forgotten shell, a discarded vessel, a ghost before she died. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached her ears, cutting through the thick veil of her terror, a sound from the world she thought she had left behind, a jarring, discordant intrusion. The distant, rising baying of a pack of hunting dogs, followed by the faint shouts of human voices, a fragile, desperate beacon of hope. It was faint, perhaps miles away, a mere whisper on the wind, almost imperceptible, lost in the vastness of the mountains. But it was there, undeniable, a beacon of the living world, a sign of clumsy human intervention. And the werewolves, impossibly, heard it too. Their heads snapped up in unison, their golden eyes flickering with something akin to annoyance, a fleeting irritation at the interruption, a disturbance in their ancient ritual, a nuisance that had to be dealt with, but not now, not when their prey was so close, so perfectly cornered, so ripe for the taking. The alpha snarled, a sound like tearing timber, a sound of ancient, bestial fury, a warning that echoed through the chamber, making the air vibrate with suppressed rage, a tremor of intense frustration. "Intruders," he rasped, his voice now laced with undisguised venom, sharp and cold as a winter night, cutting through the silence like a blade. "They send their pitiful dogs and their clumsy men to sniff out our sacred den. This is an inconvenience, a momentary disturbance in our long night. But it is a disturbance, and it is most unwelcome. We shall deal with them in time when it suits us, when the moon is right, when their numbers are weakened, but not now. Not here. Our sanctuary must remain untouched, our secrets inviolable, our existence unrevealed to the ignorant masses of humanity." His gaze hardened, losing its playful cruelty, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that promised swift, unseen retribution for this transgression, a punishment that would be meted out at their leisure, carefully orchestrated, a long, agonizing hunt that would begin soon. We must depart. The night is young, but our patience, unlike our lives, has its limits. This prey, he gestured dismissively towards Pagan with a powerful, clawed hand, as if she were an inconsequential object, a piece of detritus, will serve another purpose, a more informative and chilling purpose. She will bear witness to our continued existence, to our truth, to the futile struggle of humanity against the wild, against us, against the inevitable. To Pagan's utter astonishment, to her profound, disbelieving relief that made her limbs tremble even more violently, a relief almost as terrifying as the dread itself, they didn't finish her. They left her alive. The female werewolf, the one with amber eyes, nudged the ancient, ominous volume, the lunar howl with her snout, sending it tumbling into a crevice in the stone, out of sight, its secrets once again hidden from the casual observer. She knows too much, the alpha growled, his voice a low, guttural rumble, dangerous and impatient. She has seen too much. She must be silenced permanently now, before she speaks of what she has witnessed. She is a risk that cannot be tolerated, a loose end, a weakness that must be tied off. The alpha rose, his imposing form unfolding with an almost supernatural grace, like a colossal beast rising in the moon's cold light, radiating an aura of ancient, immense power, a force of nature personified. His eyes scanned Pagan's prone form, a thorough, assessing gaze that seemed to strip her bare, examining every facet of her being, every sinew, every bone, then shifted to the discarded book, as if weighing its importance against her life, a chilling, detached calculation of utility. He considered, for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze chillingly analytical, devoid of emotion, a timeless intelligence at work, making a decision that would forever alter Pagan's fate, sealing it with a brutal finality. Then, a slow, predatory smile returned to his lips, devoid of warmth or humor, a terrifying display of absolute control and cruelty, a promise of psychological torture far worse than physical death, a living hell. "No," he commanded, his voice cutting through the profound silence like a sharp blade, cold and precise. A chilling decision that sent a fresh wave of terror through Pagan, a terror far more insidious, more prolonged, than the threat of immediate death. Let her live. Let her live with the knowledge, the unbearable burden of what she has seen, of the truth that will gnaw at her soul for every waking moment, every waking breath, every dream, every thought. Let her live with the fear, the gnawing, perpetual dread that will consume her from the inside out, slowly, meticulously, until she is nothing but a hollowed-out shell of her former self, a living testament to despair, a monument to our victory. Let her be a testament to our enduring truth, to our unseen dominion over your insignificant world. She will be our silent prophet of dread, a living warning to any who dare to seek us out, to pry into our ancient secrets, to disturb our long slumber, a living example of our reach and our profound disdain for mortal limitations, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of your unsuspecting world, a ghost among the living, but still living, haunted by the howl, by the truth, by the beast within. With a final, disdainful glance, a look that conveyed millennia of superiority and cold indifference, a gaze that stripped her of all dignity and left her feeling utterly worthless, less than an insect, the alpha turned. In a ripple of impossibly fluid movement, a silent, graceful dissolution, the entire gathering of werewolves flowed back into the deeper shadows from which they had emerged, their forms dissolving into the gloom, becoming one with the ancient darkness of the chamber, like mist dispersing into the night, leaving no trace, no proof of their presence for human eyes to find. They left Pagan utterly alone, sprawled on the cold stone, her ankle throbbing with agonizing pain, her head ringing from the impact of the fall, her mind reeling from the horrors she had witnessed, irrevocably scarred for eternity, bound to their world. The distinct scent of ancient blood and fresh, potent fear, her own, hung heavy in the oppressive air, a stench that would forever cling to her memory, a perpetual reminder of that night, a mark burned into her very being. The distant baying of the hunting dogs grew louder now, closer, their shrill wail a discordant symphony against the profound silence of the tomb. A sound of clumsy, human intrusion, too late to save her from her ultimate fate, but perhaps just in time to save her mortal life. She had been left alive, not out of any semblance of mercy or compassion, but as a chilling, exquisitely cruel message, a fate worse than death, a life sentence of terror, a living damnation, a walking nightmare. The local authorities, alerted by Lorcan's increasingly frantic calls after Pagan failed to check in for 2 days, a concern born more of practical necessity and the strange messages he'd received than true friendship or profound worry, finally found her hours later. She was delirious, teetering on the edge of profound hypothermia, shivering uncontrollably, her body racked with pain and cold, and suffering from acute shock in the crumbling cave system. Her mind, already pushed to its breaking point by the unimaginable horrors she had witnessed, now fractured further under the immense weight of her ordeal, fragmenting into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She spoke in a rambling, desperate torrent of werewolves, of a hidden, subterranean den, of ancient, forbidden texts, of golden eyes and impossible strength, her words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent stream, a jumble of truth and terror that made no sense to anyone but her, dismissed as madness. They dismissed her claims, predictably, as the incoherent ramblings of a woman suffering from severe hypothermia, acute shock, and perhaps a pre-existing psychological fragility, the entirely predictable result of an accidental fall in an abandoned, decaying cave system. The lunar howl, of course, was gone, vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed, leaving no material proof of Pagan's harrowing experience, nothing but her shattered mind. The subterranean chamber, when they finally investigated after Pagan's persistent, almost maniacal ravings, appeared to be nothing more than a natural cavern, devoid of any altars, any sinister carvings, any trace of the horrors Pagan had witnessed, a perfect, absolute erasure, leaving no evidence behind for human eyes. The faint metallic scent that still clung to Pagan's clothes and hair was casually dismissed as mere rust, the pervasive cold as nothing more than a natural cellar chill, easily explained away by the mundane, by the convenient lies of reality. Lorcan, relieved beyond measure to find Pagan alive, nonetheless shook his head with a sigh, a profound look of pity mixed with weary acceptance on his face, lamenting his cousin's apparent mental breakdown. "The strain of living out here alone, Pagan," he'd said, his voice laced with genuine, if misguided, concern. "It's clearly taken its toll. You need rest, a long, indefinite rest, professional help, perhaps, a very long sabbatical from the wilderness. Forget these fanciful notions, old friend. They are ruining you. You must let them go for your own sake. You're safe now." Pagan was institutionalized, formally diagnosed with extreme paranoia and a severe delusional disorder. She spent months, an eternity in her traumatized mind, in a sterile white room, a stark, clinical purgatory devoid of color or warmth, a prison built of medical indifference and disbelief. The world outside became a blur of padded walls, condescending smiles from doctors who prescribed her increasingly heavy sedatives that blurred her vision and dulled her thoughts, and the hollow, echoing sound of her own desperate, unheard warnings bouncing off the silent, indifferent walls of her cell, mocking her pleas, reminding her of her isolation. She tried, time and again, to tell her story, to warn them, to convey the horrifying, undeniable truth she had unearthed, to scream the reality into their complacent, ignorant ears, hoping someone, anyone, would listen, would believe. But her words were met only with pitying looks, knowing nods that meant she was beyond help, beyond redemption, lost to the depths of her own mind, and increased dosages of tranquilizers that dulled her senses, fogged her mind, but could not extinguish the burning memory of their existence. The memory of their golden eyes, their chilling, inhuman power, their absolute, undeniable truth, burned like a brand in her mind, a constant, unbearable torment that no drug, no therapy, no amount of sleep could soothe, a perpetual nightmare from which there was no awakening, no escape, only the gnawing reality. She was trapped, not by physical bars, but by the impenetrable, insurmountable wall of human disbelief, a wall built of comforting ignorance, of convenient denial, of a terrifying, self-imposed complacency that protected them from the truth, leaving her alone with it, utterly alone, burdened by its weight. Eventually, through sheer force of will, a desperate, stubborn refusal to fully break, to surrender her sanity entirely to the encroaching darkness, or perhaps because the doctors concluded she was sufficiently stabilized, sufficiently manageable, a harmless eccentric to be tolerated, no longer a threat to their neatly ordered world, she was released, a mere shadow of her former self. She was gaunt, her once vibrant eyes perpetually haunted by unseen terrors, her spirit utterly crushed, a ghost inhabiting her own flesh, a living monument to her own undoing. She tried to rebuild her life, to return to her beloved wilderness, to find some semblance of the normalcy she had once known, but the world had irrevocably changed. For Pagan, every shadow held a potential, lurking threat, every rustle in the leaves a hidden predator, every full moon a promise of terror, a beacon of transformation, a reminder of her own changing nature. She saw the crescent moon symbol everywhere now, not just confined to the dusty pages of ancient texts or obscure engravings in forgotten forests, but insidious and pervasive, a cancerous growth on the face of the modern world. She saw it in the subtle architecture of towering modern buildings, in the ornate ironwork of city bridges spanning vast rivers, woven into the intricate, abstract patterns of corporate logos, even in the delicate, intricate designs of high-end jewelry worn by the city's elite, glittering under bright lights, mocking her with their pervasive presence, their silent claim, their undeniable ownership. They were embedded, insidious, in the very fabric of society, operating in plain sight, hidden by the very normalcy they mimicked, by the very unwillingness of humanity to perceive the true horror that coexisted with them, like parasites in a living host, slowly, silently consuming everything from within, unnoticed and unchallenged, thriving on human ignorance. She understood their chilling game now. They didn't need to rule with overt displays of power, with dramatic shows of force or ancient curses. Such brutish methods were beneath them, too crude, too visible, too easily identified, too likely to arouse suspicion and resistance. They ruled through subtle influence, through the meticulous manipulation of human affairs, guiding the currents of history, turning nations against nations, cultures against cultures, all for their own dark purposes, all to ensure a steady supply of their sustenance, their precious flesh and blood. They ruled through the quiet, unseen culling of those who grew too curious, too dangerous, too close to the truth, eliminating threats with surgical precision, leaving no trace, only unanswered questions, only the echoing silence of their passing. They were the apex predators of a modern world, a hidden, ancient species and humanity, their unaware, compliant livestock, grazing blindly in a field tended by unseen hands, utterly oblivious to the eventual slaughter that awaited them all, a harvest in the dark that was always coming, always drawing nearer. Pagan lived a solitary, isolated life, consumed by the terrifying knowledge that gnawed relentlessly at her sanity, a corrosive acid eating away at her mind, leaving behind only fear and despair, a hollowed existence. She saw the glinting eyes in the deepest woods, their forms shifting in the moonlight, scanning the wilderness for their next meal, their next victim. She spotted the unnaturally agile figures at exclusive, clandestine gatherings, their movements too fluid, too perfect, too inhuman for mortal beings, their growls devoid of true joy, filled with primal hunger, a constant low thrum. She discerned the cold, calculating eyes behind the charming smiles of the powerful and influential, the puppet masters of the world, pulling the strings of mortal ambition, directing humanity's dance of ignorance, their true intentions hidden, their hunger insatiable. She watched, always watched, her hypervigilance a constant torment, a curse that afforded her no peace, no respite, knowing that they watched her in return, a chilling, constant reminder of their warning, a promise of her inevitable end, a wolf playing with its prey, savoring the fear before the final bite. She became a ghost among the living, her purpose now reduced to mere survival, a desperate, silent scream in a world that stubbornly refused to listen, a world utterly deaf to her pleas, to her warnings, to the horrifying truth that lived among them. Her scholarly pursuits, once her greatest joy, her refuge, her very purpose in life, had become a profound curse, an opening of a door to a reality far more horrific than any myth, any legend, any nightmare she could have possibly imagined. A true hell on earth, a living damnation from which there was no escape, only a slow, agonizing descent into madness, into the wild, into the inevitable. She knew they would come for her eventually. It was an inevitability, a dark star in her personal firmament, its gravity pulling her inexorably towards her doom. A fate she could not escape, a date with destiny he could not reschedule, a final appointment with destiny. They would come when her purpose as their silent prophet had run its course, when her fear had finally become too dull, too mundane, to be entertaining, or when she simply became too inconvenient, too much of a risk, however small, to their ancient, meticulous plans, their grand design, their timeless hunt. She was merely an amusement, a lingering loose end, a living testament to their absolute power and their cruel, profound indifference. She kept a small, tarnished silver amulet hidden beneath her pillow, a pathetic, futile gesture against an ancient, insurmountable evil that laughed at such simple charms, at such quaint human beliefs. She knew it wouldn't stop them, not truly, not the children of Leakin, for their power transcended such trivialities, but it was all she had left, a tiny, glittering shard of defiance in the face of absolute, soul-crushing despair, a symbol of her final, desperate resistance, a last stand against the encroaching darkness, against her own blood. Every sunrise was a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of warmth and borrowed light, a short deferment of the inevitable, a brief respite from the gnawing terror that defined her nights, from the shadows that crept in. Every sunset was a fresh descent into suffocating terror, a plunge into the heart of her personal nightmare, a return to the shadows that held them, waiting patiently for her, for the next full moon, for the next transformation. She was a woman caught in an eternal twilight, perpetually haunted by the golden gaze of a hidden world, a world where she was merely sustenance, a fleeting whisper in the unending, unquenchable hunger of the children of Leakin. The knowledge was a slow-acting poison, slowly consuming her, leaving her hollowed out, a mere shell, a vessel filled only with dread, a living tomb walking among the oblivious, a harbinger of doom for a world that refused to see, that refused to believe, blinded by its own comfort and ignorance. The ancestral library, her former sanctuary, the place of her discovery and her awakening, now felt like a mausoleum of forgotten truths, each book a tombstone marking a lost reality, a shattered illusion, a fragment of the world as she once knew it, replaced by a darker, more terrifying one, a world of shadows and blood, of primal screams and endless hunts. The world slept on, oblivious, wrapped in a thick blanket of comfortable ignorance, dreaming its trivial human dreams, pursuing its fleeting desires, while the ancient predators moved among them, unseen, unchallenged, their thirst unquenchable, their shadows long and cold, ever present, ever watching, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike, to unleash their fury, to claim their due. And Pagan, the scholar who had dared to pull back the veil, to glimpse the forbidden truth, to uncover the hidden horror, could only watch, a terrified, silent witness to the unending night. She was a living prisoner of the truth, forever marked by the brush with true, primordial horror, a chilling testament to the fact that some secrets are best left buried, some ancient codices better left unread, for their knowledge comes with a price far greater than any mortal could ever comprehend, a price paid in sanity and peace, in the very essence of one's being, an eternal damnation. Her existence was a perpetual nightmare, an endless vigil against an enemy that walked among men, unseen and unchallenged, a force of nature that simply was, and always would be, a timeless terror. The howl called to them, eternally, inexorably, and they answered, always. And somewhere, in the dark, in the depths of the earth, perhaps in another hidden den, or in a forest glade beneath a towering, unsuspecting mountain, the lunar howl lay, waiting for its next victim, its next curious soul to damn to an eternity of knowing, an eternity of dread. It was a cycle, ancient and unbreakable, a testament to the shadows that always linger, and the truths that are too terrible to be known, too horrifying for the human mind to bear. The hunt continued, unseen, ceaseless. Humanity danced on the precipice, utterly unaware of the claws in the dark, dancing to a tune orchestrated by their unseen masters, their flesh already marked for the harvest, their screams unheard.